Hi, I'm Peter Reinhardt, and welcome to the Johnson & Wales International Symposium on Bread. I'm coming to you from the Hance Auditorium in Charlotte, North Carolina, where we've held the last 4 bread symposiums, and as you can see, there's nobody here but me. And this is where we usually have it. The seats are all empty because this year, thanks to you, the symposium will be presented online, virtually, in our new presentation hall, which is where I will join you in just a minute. Thank you, and thanks for being part of our new virtual Johnson & Wales International Symposium on Bread, presented by Puratos. Welcome again. Throughout the entire symposium, I'll be thanking our generous sponsors over and over again, and ask that you do as well by visiting their booths and pavilions in the exhibitor hall. There you will see lots of bonus content, and you can also make appointments to meet with the folks from these companies that serve our baking community so well. Our presenting sponsor is Puratos, who has partnered with us from the very beginning for all of our symposiums, and it is their support that helped us get this one-of-a-kind gathering of thought leaders off the ground. Please also visit our fabulous flour and milling sponsors, Ardent Mills, Lindley Mills, and Central Milling. Thank you also to our equipment sponsors, the WP Bakery Group and Allied Bakery and Food Service Equipment. And thank you also to our specialty food product companies, Probiotine, Fire Within, Big Green Egg, and Mock Mill. Please check out all of their booths to learn about their wonderful and unique products. And also thanks to our media sponsors, Cook's Country, The Local Palate, the James Beard Foundation, and the Bread Bakers Guild of America. You'll be hearing more about all of them throughout the entire series of presentations. So again, thank you to all our sponsors. At the end of today's presentation, you will also see our credit scroll, thanking all of the people behind the scenes who made this event possible, including our production and technical partner, Ganoid Communications, our creative team at Gumbo Marketing, and the many folks at Johnson & Wales University, our hosts for this, our 4th annual gathering. So stick around if you will. But now it's time to get things rolling with today's presentation, so let's go live. And once again, welcome to the Johnson & Wales International Symposium on Bread, presented by Puratos.
Sorry, Peter, you are...
Okay, I'm going to use my, oh, see, got echo. Let me lower that. Okay, is that better? In fact, I'm going to just shut this one down.
Yes, it's fine now. Yeah, it's fine now.
Sorry about that. I had some computer problems. I had this on my backup phone here, but now I got my computer finally working. So I'm sitting here with Adrian Lipscombe. I've got Toni Tipton Martin and Erika Council. This is our panel for today. Thank you guys for joining us. And sorry for my complications. I'm going to turn off my phone here so that I can get all that background noise out of the way. And today, our topic, and welcome all of you for joining us wherever you are right now throughout the world. Today, our topic is the missing mix in baking. And we started putting this panel together a few months ago with Toni, and Adrian and Erika were kind enough to join us in this conversation. And so let me just get the ball rolling and let everybody know that, we're going to see where this goes. This is going to be a freewheeling, open conversation. And I'm just going to throw this question out as a starter question. And then those of you who are watching, please feel free to log in your Q&A or chat. I'll be monitoring that as we go, and I'll continue to feed the panel questions as they come in. But let me just ask you all, what is this missing mix in baking that we're talking about and that we've been leading up to during these last couple of weeks is telling everybody to join in today because we're going to talk about the missing mix and baking. Can you explain a little bit of what we mean by that title?
Well, hi everybody, and thanks for.
Toni, I think you're muted. Can you, if you can
not on my side.
Your volume unmuted.
My side is not muted. Can you hear me now?
I'm not hearing you. Let me see.
We can hear.
Maybe I'm not. Is everyone else hearing? Adrian, can you speak? Let me see if I can hear you.
Can you hear me now?
Okay, you can all hear. The only one who can't hear is me. So it's got to be something in my area. So let me see if I can get my camera, my system to work. Built-in output, internals for seeing the system. I can hear that. Okay, let's speak and pause to hear reply. I hear myself. I know. Okay, yes. All right.
Can you hear me? Can you hear me?
I can. All right.
Okay.
Whatever it is that I did, I got it to work. I have no idea what I did, but this has been that kind of day where I'm freewheeling the whole thing.
No worries.
Okay, Toni, go ahead and take it.
Okay, so I said, hey, everybody, thanks for joining us. Thanks for having us, of course. And as you noted, Peter, we've been talking about this for a couple of months, and it was important to me, as it continues to be, to make sure that the next generation is represented whenever I can do that. Because part of what's missing in the mix is role models. There are constantly perpetuated myths and stories about what it means to be an African-American baker. And so many of those mythologies don't make room for our next generation to see themselves, to find somebody that they want to emulate. And these happen to be two of my favorite bakers. And so it's important for us to stop talking so much about what is missing and bring in more voices, more of the ancestral voices as well as the modern voices, so that we can learn more about what it does mean to have African-American bakers in the industry.
And of course, you've done so much to help to sort of open those doors of understanding for everybody in terms of our, of our heritage links and everything else. But Adrian and Erika, as the sort of new role models, or some of the many new role models, what were some of the barriers that you ran into just trying to get up and running?
I mean, for me, it is that missing link of following and understanding who's out there doing what I want to do. But also being able to have that connection in this world of baking, right? And especially if you're talking about bread, you don't see too many people of color, especially at least in the forefront, right? You know that they're in the back of the house, they're all the way in the back. They're almost the invisible. They come in at 5 in the morning or earlier and they leave, and we do not get to experience seeing them and seeing their face, or we just get to see their hard work and what they put, what they have done by their hands, but they do not get the accolades nor the presentation of work which they should receive for their good baked goods or bread that you see. So a lot of, especially my teachings, was family, watching my own family members, my grandmother, my great aunts, my mom, but also reading books and looking up our history. Like, I had to be determined to want to learn this, but also learn about the heritage of it, not just from the making of biscuits and the making of bread, but all the way down to who milled it. Where did it come from? Was it local? Was it, seeded by Black hands? It's like, we have a strong history in the bread and the culinary world, but we have somehow, on purpose, have been being created invisible in the history, and let alone still today, we are still shown in very small numbers.
Mm-hmm. And Erika, you want to jump in on that?
Yeah, I mean, I co-sign on everything Adrian said, mainly the connection, but also just, I I know for me, being looked at as though I don't have the skill set or the knowledge as a white counterpart might have, especially when it comes to the more advanced techniques as sourdough or something that they think requires a different level of scientific knowledge. So I see that a lot when it comes to just interacting when it comes to bread, not just biscuits, but just taking it to the next level of sourdough loaves, English muffins, things like that. And they're just kind of second guessing the idea of, oh, you know how to make that. Yeah, and but your white counterparts never get that questioning. But yeah, there's not a really strong connection that you can make, mainly because you have that barrier of people thinking you don't have the knowledge. And then, it can be kind of, you're over here on this side and then they're over there on that side because they have this supposedly wealth of knowledge where you're looked upon as though you don't.
Is it a perception problem that harkens back to sort of a passive prejudice and institutional racism that just exists in this country, or is there something else that that either is that at work or that could be overcome?
I don't think it's institutionalized, but I also would like to say, it's a prodigal myth, right? This is what they think Black people do not have expertise, and in which, in fact, we were the ones that were making this, down to fermentation, down to making beer. We have this technique, and as a modern Black woman that does know how to make sourdough and makes it from other than water than flour, a lot of my counterparts, especially my white counterparts, are pretty shocked and surprised that I would know this. Maybe I didn't learn on the same track as going to a culinary school or going to a baking school or staging or doing things like that. I went a different path, and in which I can make just as as much bread and as well as fluffies and cells that they seen, that sometimes you couldn't even compare whose hands it was. It's just because of just what we see and what we hear as myths that have just been institutionalized, not just in our field, but just culturally. So it's kind of figuring out how to dismantle those myths. Just by you looking at the color of our skin, you think that we are uneducated in this field.
I think what's really interesting, Peter, is the fact that we had the picture of an African-American woman on a baking product that sold millions and millions of dollars for Quaker Oats and for their predecessors in this field. Making pancakes is a form of baking. Whether we call it that specifically or not, the science is of making a flour mixture rise. And so here the expertise was clearly seated in the hands and the image of a Black woman. And then that messaging was distorted into one of just servitude and service to others. And so this mythology that we're all speaking about is deeply rooted. It goes back for so many generations, just in terms of the way that we were recorded in history. And it's not exclusive to the white community. African Americans that recorded Black food businesses, for example, noted that there were lots of Black bakers, but they attributed that skill to men and not to women. That happened, of course, on the smaller scale. The larger mythology is rooted in the idea that baking requires science. So as long as African Americans are making quick breads like cornbreads or biscuits, things that don't require that technique of thinking about leavening and chemistry, then it seemed like there was a period in history where that was okay. We could be associated with the intense labor of beaten biscuits. But as soon as commercial leavenings become available, mysteriously, we don't have those skills anymore. And lastly, what I will again circle back to on the point of men, is Linda Civitello has pointed out in her book, The Baking Wars, that Bisquick is a product that a businessman observed an African-American making, and we do not know that person's name. So African-Americans, as Adrian points out, have been the propellants between so many products, whether it's the pancake mix or the Bisquick, the buttermilk type baking mixes for convenience. And yet we have not been acknowledged for that.
There's so many layers and levels of, challenges to face in this very description that you just gave, including, the women versus men. The women themselves have been given short shrift when it comes to this world, and then in this in general, but then we'll keep it specific to baking. And then, of course, then it's the various, then in general, people of color. As you said, the Bisquick, you're saying, was actually developed by an African-American man? Was it a man or a woman? And
we think it was a man.
Either way, he just got short shrift. He got left off the credit scroll, so to speak, of developing a product. And this goes to, we're talking about really deep societal problems right here. And
I hope Erika can respond to this, because in my book, I point out that her grandmother, also lots of these women had this convenience product. They assembled their own baking mix because it helped them get the job done faster, right? So they were making these instant products for the convenience of their own kitchen. And the first time I read about that in print was reading the Mama Dip cookbooks. And then later discovering that that there was actually what we think was a trained cook, which those were generally men. So we assumed this person behind the Bisquick product was a man, but her grandmother was also making that product. So it's sort of like our people have been doing this. They've done it casually, they've done it informally, they've done it formally. And we've made a lot of money for other people. A lot of money.
I totally get that. Erika, can you talk a little bit about your grandma? I mean, for those people who don't know who Mama Dip was, could you give a little bit of the backstory?
So Mildred Council was my paternal grandmother. She opened a restaurant in 1976, 1977 in Chapel Hill, North Carolina. She just had Southern food, soul food, as they like to say. But she was a baker, and all of my aunts are bakers, and uncles are, they don't like the term chef, but I mean, my Uncle Joe can break down fish like you've never seen before. But, I always try to tell people I was surrounded by people, not just my grandma Dip, but my maternal grandmother used to make biscuits, and she would ferment potatoes. And I'm like 6 years old watching this. I had a great Aunt Fanny that used to keep jars of just jars around her kitchen, and they were sitting in strategic places. And she would pick one up and smell it. And depending on which one smelled the way she wanted to smell, that's what she used to make this brown bread, which was the best bread I've ever had in my life. And she lived to be 103 years old. She died in 1986. But I'm saying this is 83, 84, and I'm seeing this, and then this so my entire life I've been surrounded by Black women and men who use scientific ways to make the more advanced breads, as you could say. And, with the mixes, my grandma Dip with her own cornbread mix, biscuit mix, pie mix. I mean, a lot, like Toni said, a lot of those things were to make it convenient. So when you're trying to turn out thousands of baskets of biscuits a day at your restaurant, you've got the mix already here to the side. And then you can also show people, how you want your stuff made, because you've already started the base of it. And in my business today, my biscuit mix is a mix that I have put together with different ingredients that you can take and then build off of that, no matter who's working that day. So, it's just a product of my own formulations from what I saw growing up from Black women.
Right. So you took an idea that your grandmother was already doing, and you just made it your own. You did your own version of that, and it built a business around that.
Yep.
Yeah. Now, what year did your grandma pass? Because I think I met her in Chapel Hill. But was she around? I think when I was in Chapel Hill and met her was around 2005 or 6. Was she still been there? She was still working. Because I think she was still working at the restaurant the day that somebody brought me in for breakfast.
I worked up to the restaurant until a month before she passed away. It was 2017. So yeah.
In 17, so she lived well past when I first came. I mean, that and that restaurant, you know, already was very legendary in the area. I mean, and maybe beyond. There's so many sort of examples and stories like this, many of which, if it wasn't for writers like you all telling these stories, and Toni, you know, sort of capturing them in some of her books, that many people wouldn't know about this sort of the heritage stories, and also a lot of traditional wisdom that was embodied by the people in these stories that was passed on, sounds like mainly through word of mouth and through, you know, like being in the kitchen with grandma or whatever, because they weren't getting the notoriety, the publishing opportunities, the business opportunities. Am I capturing this right? Is this sort of a general sort of clear statement of sort of what the challenge was to begin with?
Sure. I hope Adrian will chime in on this one. I like to point out that we could go on, and many times we do, talking about the barriers and the obstacles and the problems. And what I've tried to do in my work, and I think that both of these ladies do as well, is to take the lessons that were passed on in the obstacles and the barriers, and then use that perseverance to advance what it is that we want to do in the next generation. Yes. So while I have made it a point in my work to explain these stories, to give names and voices to truths, my point is to do that so that we have the role models that allow the next generation to be as creative, as artistic, and as science-based or not as they would like to be. That hopefully for me as a writer, since I'm not an actual crafts person, I've given them the freedom, which was my goal, was to set all of the next generation free to be able to create in the way that they choose to. And if they choose to create in the exact same way that their ancestors did, that's certainly up to them. But, you know, we have people like Brian Ford, who sold tens of thousands of cookbooks on sourdough baking. And imagine if more of our people had been given publishing contracts, if I hadn't faced the obstacles that I did in trying to get my content published, if we had more equity and more access, imagine the additional contributions that could be made. So while it is easy to talk about the barriers that we've encountered, I like to call it something that my hairstylist used to say, we're going to trauma share for just a little bit, and then we move to action and what can we do next, and with that knowledge. And that's what I love so much about what both of them are doing. Especially Adrian's focus on the land.
Yeah, exactly. And thank you for bringing that up, because that's great. The first time I've heard that term, trauma share, but I love it because, you know, we have to kind of go through that and cover that in the first part of this in order to give context, but that's not where I want to be, because, you know, this symposium is all about the future of bread and the future of baking. And I think that's where you want to be, you know, also leading this conversation. So let's move into, you know, the future. Now, we're based on having overcome all the challenges, all the barriers, everything to be here in this moment. Where do you, the three of you are all visionaries, so to speak, of, you know, in this sector. Where do you see it happening? And I know, Adrian, you're already doing some very specific things. Can you talk a little bit about those?
Yeah, I mean, for me, I think COVID really kind of opened my eyes a little bit more about our food itself and where it comes from. And owning a restaurant at the time, all my farmers were white, and I did not have a connection where I was with any Black farmers. And at the time, we were seeing a lot of suffering, even with our white farmers. And it made me wonder what was happening with our Black farmers. And when you started looking at the numbers of Black farmers are less than 2%. In fact, I think they're 1.3% today of how many Black farmers are in the nation. This is serious. This is very significant. This is something that through our history, we have always been a part of the land, all the way down to where, if you want to get technical over the term, the 40 acres in the mule, it's the one thing we asked for when approached and asked, what did we want? And we said land after war. We would like identity, create community. It gives us a purpose. It also creates a legacy as you pass it down to your children. So the future. So working with Black farmers and getting more people interested in farming hand in hand just is a huge passion of mine, but it also goes back and relates to the food, right? It's not just the land, it's about tilling the land and how do you get the ingredients to the plate in any which form, if it's bread or if it's corn or if it's a biscuit, how do we get that there? And how do you create successful Black farmers? Not that we're just giving land away, but how do you create a legacy? How do you create a term that they have a business or they have a community in which they're able to share? So this has been a really big interest of mine, and also making sure awareness across our African-American culinary to really understand our connection back to the land.
Are you seeing more farmers, African-American farmers, getting into the game?
You do. You're starting to see the numbers, especially young people being very interested about farming. It's just where you get this information from, right? How it can be really technical. It's technical online. The USDA website is clunky. They're probably going to kill me for saying that, but it's like, it's that opportunity that, how do we make this path easier for them to become successful? How do we create mentorships with our elders, Black farmers, that they learn the techniques of the ways? How do we have generations that are five generations deep, Black farmers, and that they may not have another generation to take after them? So how do we record that history? How do we keep moving forward on when to plant, if it's Monday or Wednesday, and the weather, because it gets technical, right? It really does get down to tradition and technicality, and a lot of things that people just underestimate us for. And I'm saying we are very much underestimated. Mm-hmm. And when you talk about bringing the product or the food or the flour or the milling process forward, our hands have been in it forever. They've been in it forever. And, I think what has been brought forth is just the way that we have now looked at technology and how we have looked at education and who had access to this information and who wrote this information. And, my purpose, especially growing up, was to listen to my elders and to watch them make these ingredients. And so I know how to do it by hand. I know how to do it by memory. What I think we lacked, and which Toni also pressed on, is that we need to get away from just doing it orally. We need to start writing this down, and we need to putting a purpose on this. And as you probably have seen or known in history, that recipes were stolen. Things were taken for the, if you talk about a slave that created a recipe, it probably went into that family's cookbook, and passed on to those generations. Mm-hmm. Now it's time for us to create our own cookbooks and to put ourselves forward and call ourselves experts in these fields that we've been in for decades and centuries, and be able to willing to come and do presentations like this and talk about it and talk about our methods. And I think trust is another large issue. And who do we trust to help us and to help us make successful in this field? Because a lot of people have been burned. Even up to today, a lot of people have been burned. A lot of people are mad. A lot of people will not work with a lot of people. And it just hasn't been, they have not been mentored or given the opportunity to be able to be successful in the work that they do. So you find us doing it ourselves, and pulling our own selves up by the bootstraps and making our own way.
Are networks forming, and to provide the training and mentorship? Is it getting organized, so to speak, to be able to provide those kinds of resources and support?
We're working our way through providing that, but there are organizations. It's a problem of access. And how do you get access to that information? They're out there. There's programs older than I am that help get people to farming and to help people through culinary, but there's just has been a lack of access. My largest question has been, how do we talk to them? How do you talk to Black people? And I said, the same way you came and approached me. You talk to us. You treat us as an equal. You understand that we do understand what you're saying. We are just wondering, how do we create this access in this form that is equitable among all?
Mm-hmm. And that's, well, so what kind of progress are we making in that direction? And are you seeing, I guess, like I say, growth, and are doors opening, and are what were previously the prevailing barriers, are they breaking down the way that that some of us hope that they are and we perceive, but maybe we're not seeing it right?
Yes and no. There's larger issues on a more governmental hand, and white farmers suing because of the access to the Black Farmers Fund. You're also seeing people coming forward and saying they want to help. But I'm saying there still is this disconnect between the access of it. And we're hoping to be a conduit or a translator to help find people in the right direction to be able to access this information where they're from. And also putting boots on the ground, like purchasing of land, leasing land, moving land to people, because the main thing is not to just get them on land, but to be successful. Like, how do you till that land? How do you be involved? If you are a farmer or you're not a farmer, we just don't want to give you land. It takes a lot more than just giving you a piece of land to farm a piece of land. So we want to make sure that if anyone we're helping and assisting, they have all the tools in their toolbox to be able to be successful.
And Peter, if I could just amplify several things that Adrian said before we move to Erika. I think it's really important that the broader audience hear very carefully that our enslaved ancestors were not asking for something extra. So when she mentioned 40 acres and a mule, people were asking for what they were entitled to, for all of the generational loss that had occurred. And when you own land, then you have the ability to perpetuate generational wealth. And your people can get educations, and they can buy more land, and they can buy equipment and seed and pay for water. Like, these are elements that are expensive in terms of trying to carry on the traditions. So we have not been asking for handouts. And what she's describing today, full forward, is not handouts either. When we're talking about getting people up to speed and providing access and education, it is because they have been systemically left out, intentionally left out. Land was taken away from families in order to put interstates in place. There were all kinds of governmental interventions and private interventions that destroyed Black agricultural progress. So when we're talking about today needing to provide mentorship and written documentation and legacy stories from the elders who can teach the generations, it's because there has been a break in the generational transfer of those skills and knowledge. It isn't that we're asking someone to give us something for free. What we are saying is basically get out of the way, and to also replace what has been owed, what has been lost. And so what I'm doing is using my voice, my nonprofit, my cookbook collection as an opportunity to mentor the next generation of writers, so that writers will capture these stories and tell them on behalf of families that don't have the time or the talent to be able to do so. And so we want to go into communities where there are still living elders who understand seed time and harvest and when you plant and all of those elements that go into getting grain on the table, so that they can learn about why sugar's in the cornbread in some parts of the country and why it isn't in other places, because the grain wasn't of the same quality. Those are things that we have known inherently. And Erika talked about fermentation in particular. That's the science of that. That we just need to be able to pass on to the next generation. So there's this peculiar mix of need and access, but not because people are looking for something for free. And I think that's important for us to keep reiterating, that we have the talent, we have the knowledge and the skills, but there are barriers that have been intentionally erected that need to come down.
Right, and hopefully little by little they're starting to come down, and there's progress being made. But on the other side of that equation, are you finding in each of your works that there's hunger out there for this knowledge? I mean, I love this concept of sort of the transmission of knowledge from one generation to the next. It's essential. Without it, the world's going to come to a crashing halt. But you need to have somebody at the other end willing. And I'm wondering, given the current state of society, are you running into a problem finding, people hungry for that knowledge, or are you finding them and kind of finding a way to deliver that transmission?
You want to answer, Erika? Do you?
I guess I'm on the opposite side. I'm more on the restaurant and that side of building the business and assets. And I gotta say, I don't see a lot of change, mainly because the people are the same. When it comes to access to the land, just to build on, or just getting into, these, I'm in Atlanta, right? So all the neighborhoods that have been, horribly gentrified, and there's not a single Black restaurant owner in any of these gentrified neighborhoods that were historically Black. But if you look at Atlanta as a whole, there are 4 developers here, and just getting in that circle to be acceptable, to be able to get the pitch, to be able to even get a space in the new developments they're building. It's very similar to an issue my grandma Dip had in the early 90s when she was trying to buy land to build the Mama Dips where it sits today. So, I mean, I remember that, and I look at this now, and I don't see any change there. So I'm a bit more not as hopeful. I want to be hopeful, but I think for me, I look at it as, I feel like I have had an opportunity. I have a brick and mortar in the old Fourth Ward now, and in a position to build out from that. So how can I take the loopholes that I have seen and just the knowledge I have obtained and provide that to people just in Atlanta who say, well, gosh, how did you get over there? I've been trying to get, in this area for years, and, I can never get anyone to call me back. I can never get this and that. And unfortunately, it is very much based on, who the people who own these spaces or the gatekeepers of these spaces deem as, good enough to be in those areas. So I guess when it comes to land, asset and access, I still see a huge barrier right there. And I honestly don't know how that's ever going to turn around, and that goes back to the generational wealth thing, because a lot of these development companies and things are family-owned companies that have been in existence for years. And I think about my family. I'm from North Carolina, so when it comes to Black farmers, our land it was taken from us. So like, in my family, my great uncles whose fathers were sharecroppers, they don't want anything to do with it because they saw, what happened. So I've always grown up with the idea, well, if you go and farm that land, these white folks can come over here and take it from you, or have you work in this land and work you into debt. I got a cousin that's still paying debt on a property that was basically a shared legacy sharecroppers from 1910, you know, and it's 2021.
Yeah, and they're still, as you go borrowing that phrase that Toni mentioned, they're still living in the trauma phase of this, and that's a barrier that they have to face individually to, if they're going to move forward. You all are, as three strong women, have established through your successes your own platforms. You each have a platform at least built on some success and breakthroughs. How are you expanding those platforms in the various works that you're doing to include others, you know, to get others on board? And is that one strategy for continuing growth in this area?
Well, I'll go quickly to say that I've spoken that, and you can see that here today. I don't go anywhere without taking one of them with me. Mm-hmm. So to the extent that I can. So I try to I started out by giving my book signings in Black restaurants to draw attention to chefs that weren't getting attention. And since then, we've seen those very chefs profiled in national magazines. We see them on documentaries. So we are seeing a little bit of progress. When I met Adrian, she had some of the most phenomenal baked goods, but she wasn't a restaurateur yet. So I can see the growth in her experience and what she's been able to do and to accomplish. And now she's trying to extend that hand as well. But the number of us that exist that have this level of access are few. Social media has us in a peculiar situation where we see a lot of faces and people have a lot of followers, and our success is measured in likes and influencer culture. But I'm continually asking the young people, how are you monetizing that? Mm-hmm. It's not enough. Your face has been on a package already. So just because they want to pay you, and send you a case of some product in order to be the endorsement for their product, make sure you're thinking this all the way through. Again, to Adrian's point, not because we're trying to get something for free, but make sure that you're paid for your worth, which is something that our ancestors could not negotiate and argue for, as Erika has said.
I also think, especially for the future, right now, I have some mentees, and one came through a cold call, just a cold email call. Others come through people who are traveling and trying to find somebody to work with, and through scholarship, through just different avenues in which they are seeking that type of mentorship. I do say cold call. If you see somebody that you are very interested in just wanting to know, even to ask a question, people like to talk, right? People like to talk. And especially if you have an interest in what they're interested in doing or what they are doing professionally, a lot of us are starting to think about our legacy and what we're leaving behind. So being able to pass down our knowledge to the next generation is very important to me, beyond just my kids, So this is an opportunity. If you're here in this presentation and you hear or you like what we're saying, reach out and talk to one of us. Toni's right, like social media really does pull people in a certain direction in the limelight, but what's beyond that, beyond being on that package, I'm very scared who's the next person on the pancake mix, like digitalized, right. Who's the next one that's going to be as you roll through your Instagram, and are they really getting their worth? It is a difficult world, especially for a Black female trying to brand themselves, run a business, live a family, trying to control what their brand is, and leave a legacy all at the same time, and still be acknowledged for their work that they're doing. So it is a difficult path, and also a strange one, since social media has now come to be a big player in this. And we have to find out, ourselves, what is that value, and what is that value going to be in the future for us as we move forward.
Yeah, I guess for me, I'm just sort of continuing, how I learned. So I have like three young ladies that work with me now from the high school. I actually met from my daughter, who's a college student. She's actually been great to connect me with people. Oh, your mom, she can make these things. I didn't even know, Black folks could do that. So, they come and help out every now and then at the restaurant. I guess on my side, I'm very curious about the access, the land, commercial property, and just, I go to a lot of city board meetings. I'm that nuisance person, just, things that you don't typically think to look at, when's the next city council hearing, just so you can hear about zoning laws, and just, it's the same people in the room. So I'm kind of learning, okay, this is where I need to be so that I can hear about the next steps. So how did you get to a place to where you were able to obtain these commercial properties and things like that? Because that's definitely, especially here in Atlanta, you could kind of do a case study for Atlanta when it comes to the demographics and who are the top chefs and who have the best restaurants and the best locations. Probably only one of them is Black. Why is that? Well, I guess it's very simple. We just don't have the access that some of these other people have. So I think that on top of running a business and, I'm writing a book about how I learned how to make bread, and all the people that inspired me, I guess my focus is not only mentoring, but just, looking at that access to land and just that circle and how to insert myself, and then pull as you climb, as they say, to those who are looking to get into it too. The kiosks in Ponce City Market and Krog Street Market and these food halls that selectively choose who gets to be inside them. I mean, that can make and break your business,
right.
And just understanding that flow and advocating for more diversity in those spaces.
Well, I want to throw this conversation open to those of you who are out there watching. And so please use the Q&A, or the Q&A would be best to just, if you want to throw in some questions, I'll convey them. And then those of you who can join us afterwards for the after party, where we switch over to the Zoom meetings format where it's more informal and we can talk to each other, we'll do that, in a few minutes, because we're amazingly coming to the end of this hour. But I want to throw out one thought that struck me as you were describing all of these. And because first of all, we're talking about the fact that we have 3 role models, and you and Toni had right at the beginning said we need more role models, and we need more stories, to share with everybody and connect people to these stories. And I was thinking of an analogy in this to this, and you're in the food sector, we've been talking about baking as a specific sector within a sector, but a parallel track where I've seen progress made is in the film industry, where, in fact, just the other day, Melvin Van Peebles passed away, and all of a sudden there's a lot of news stories about what an influential person he was and how unrecognized he was, and I remember seeing back when I was maybe in my 20s, seeing, his classic Sweetback's Badass Song, and that was being heralded at the time as the beginning of something that could be a door opener. And then since that time, there's been incremental steps of progress made by a number of directors, both men, now women, Ava DuVernay, people like that who've entered the game. And suddenly it seems as though there's at least a much bigger piece of equity happening in that sector of the entertainment industry. Whether it's, starting maybe with people like Spike Lee or Tyler Perry more recently. And of course, in Atlanta, you probably see a lot of Tyler Perry's influence. Is there anything to be learned from that kind of sort of progress story that can be applied to the things that we're talking about here? Because success seems to breed success.
You don't see a lot of Tyler Perry's influence. I mean, you see a lot of Tyler Perry, just to be 100%. I mean, you see a lot of Tyler Perry, and he's got a great studio, and he built that, out there past College Park. But I mean, you don't see a ton of his influence here to be honest with you. I guess, you know, the film industry, of course, is, you know, is booming here somewhat, but, you know, as regards to Tyler Perry, I think, you know, he does a lot of influential work, but, you know, and on our side of things, you don't see a ton of his influence, I guess you could say. And I think that still is, well, I mean, and that just shows, I mean, that's Tyler Perry, and he's still not, you know, at the head of the table in Atlanta when it comes to getting access to certain areas. I mean, he built his studio way out there in College Park, where, I mean, you know, the other studio that came has this nice Lakewood. I mean, it's some conversations that could be had there too. I mean, I get what you're saying, but I'm just
thinking in terms of like creating workforce development, even creating jobs and opportunities and opening doors for other people, you know, that have had barriers to entry. Now, hopefully breaking down some of those doors, which I think is part of what we're talking about here, even if it's breaking down the doors to getting land. You know,
well, one of the things that I like about baking is the fact that there are certainly stereotypes that say that African Americans are primarily bakers of cornbread and biscuits and things like that, as I said earlier. But I wonder whether bakers have the same hurdle to climb in terms of getting audience. So for me, the step is we need writers who expose small bakers in their communities. Without social media, Adrian's Bakery would have been a phenomenon in its small community, and other people would not know anything about it, and then she wouldn't have this big mail order business and so on. So what we need is to turn the spotlight in our hometown, on our hometown heroes, on the local folks that have had these bakeries or have been proficient in the baking field with maybe there's only one or two items on their menu, but they're stellar, right? And then we need to get the industry, to your point, to support them. Yeah. What kind of awards are those? I'm not really sure how we identify them. But if we can get more credit for them, then they can be the role models. We can get more resources into their pockets because people are supporting their business. And as they grow and succeed, then they can cultivate the next generation. Yeah. But for chefs anyway, the obstacle has been that not only is there a stereotype about what the expectation of their food should look like and taste like is it only soul food? Mm-hmm. Then reviewers don't understand that food when they go and eat it. But if you taste Adrian's fritters or her stuffed cookies or her rum cake, it doesn't make any difference to you what her race is. It's mm-hmm. divine. And right. You don't go in with a preconceived expectation that it's going to be soul bread necessarily. So I think if there is any positive here for bakers, it is, or if there's a different kind of pressure on bakers than there is on chefs, it's that they're more invisible. There seems like there's a lot more focus on who the top latest chef is mm-hmm. For these magazines. So that's one reason why at Cook's Country, we go around the country and we are looking for hometown heroes to spotlight so that we can draw attention to them.
Right, exactly. And then they become influencers for the next generation and beyond. Right. While we have you here, and since you and I think all three of you probably are pretty well networked out there, know who are the rising stars, who are the people we should be paying attention to that beyond the three of you who we now know personally and directly, but who are some of the other unknowns that maybe we should be tracking and know about?
Oh, there's so many.
Just give us a starter list.
Let's see. There's Erika Williams. There is Rahana Bizarret Martinez. There is Taval Joseph Bristol. There's so many different people from, Tanya and David Thomas are another good set of people. Matthew Rayford just had a book out. There's so many people out there that are are doing the work. And then it gets even closer when you start talking mom and pops that have been generations deep in owning their place and their space, but they don't get that light shined on them. They don't have social media access unless some type of influencer goes and eats there and then does a TikTok, and then they have to deal with the capacity of people that are going to enter into their shops. There's so many people, and Toni's right. Like, there's not enough light that is shined on this, and I have to blame media, right? So I'm not even just talking about magazines and such. I'm also talking about television and television shows. You're talking about the Food Network shows right across the board. You see a lot of them go to the same restaurants, even the same Black restaurants over and over again, and not really diving in detail and really understanding what these restaurants are and what they have and what they carry, that are generations, and they deserve this spotlight. I think we're missing a lot of role models on TV. I think the diversity needs to be widened across the board, social media wise, TV wise, paper, in the newspaper wise and magazine wise, that we need to open to diversity. And I want to hear new names. I want to see new faces. I want others to join with their voice. And we're saying the same thing, that we need this diversity and we need more people of color to be shown in the spotlight. And beyond, when they look at Blacks and they say we only cook soul food, that's just, again, another myth. A lot of us do go beyond that. And I think we're just never given that spotlight or chance to really show unless we push ourselves through.
Yeah, and I have an incredible sweet tooth, as Adrian knows. So, my list leans heavy into people that are baking sweet things, So Dullester Miles has been in Birmingham for generations. At Highlands Bar and Grill, and only recently received a James Beard Award. But at least that acknowledgement makes us aware of new voices like Valerie Lomas, who's a baker, or Jocelyn Delk Adams, who's a baker, or Jarrell Guy, who is my photographer for Jubilee, who coincidentally is a vegan baker. And so African Americans are navigating in all of these spheres that everyone else is. We have a vegan baker. We have people that are exclusively cake bakers. We have people that do really terrific Afrocentric cookies that are decorated like women's beautiful headdresses. I mean, they're just one place that people can find out more information is to follow on social media groups like Black Food Folks, where African Americans are listed there. You can follow and see people from all walks of the industry.
Interesting. Well, it seems like, that you got one of the challenges is, number one, for somebody to reach a place of recognition where they become recognizable and influential. That's one part of the process. And the other is then, what do you do with the platform of influence that you've created, which is so rare and precious, when there's thousands of others who are unrecognized and could certainly, benefit from that, and others who don't even know how to get into the game itself. And I guess what I'm hearing, I'm hoping that what I'm hearing is that this sort of a sign of hope here is that as more and more people are becoming successful and recognized, and now are able to use sort of the more, we'll call it, democratic platforms of social media and things like that, that have, they're kind of like two sides of that coin, but at least they're in a place of influence, and possibly could be in a place of, being of aid, and pathways for other people to enter. Because in the end, the bottom line of all this is workplace development. We're trying to create jobs and opportunities and a life of success, of being able for everyone to be able to live the dream. Are you seeing? I know that we're depending on where you're dealing with these issues and stuff. Are we seeing any? I think since we're coming to the end of this hour, maybe exit this part of our discussion with any signs. What do you see in the immediate future and maybe long-term future?
I think the immediate is that people are more concerned about where they're getting their food. They want to know who's produced it. They're asking a lot more questions. So that is the positive of social media. So we are seeing a lot more entrepreneurship happening in alternative methods. So one question we can perhaps begin to ask is, just because people aren't successful in a traditional model, are they being successful in the new model? And what are the measures for that? That'll be an important way for us to determine who's actually growing and developing and thriving.
So as they say, to be continued, to be determined still, as if we keep our eyes open and track this and follow what's going on, there's hopefully new stories and new heroes to emerge from all this early discussion, so to speak. We're tilling the fields here and trying to pave the way for other people to step into their own success stories. And I hope that this is just a little small piece of that ongoing conversation.
I agree. Any
final comments before we wrap up this phase? And by the way, just so you know, and everyone who's watching knows, that this will be archived, this conversation, because not everybody who is enrolled in the symposium can be here live for the live session. So many people will watch this later on, on their through our archive. And then at the end of the year, back in the spring, we're going to put all of these conversations up permanently on YouTube for general public access, free access for everybody. So this conversation will exist, as a starting point again for others. So, and hopefully will be, useful and beneficial in furthering this inquiry, so to speak. But anyway, Erika or Adrian, any final comments here before we switch over to the informal phase?
Well, I just want to say, I love what Toni said about social media, seeing like sort of this new crop, even in bakers, just seeing people being a little bit more entrepreneurial, just from, their own sort of social media, or just an old, like real throwback plate sale. But I guess what you also see from that is the health department and the food service, all the loopholes you have to get through to be able to do that legally has changed somewhat. And I do think that is a positive, because that was a huge barrier of having to have a 3-compartment sink and all this, Echo Lab come and hook up your sanitation. A lot of those things that are huge financial barriers for people just trying to start out. You're seeing some sort of changes there, all based off of what Toni was describing, people finding, their own ways of mealing and selling that. So I think that that's a huge, huge positive.
That's a great thing. Yeah, thanks for sharing that.
Yeah.
Adrian?
I do also agree, we have what's called the cottage law, and that is allowing those bakers to cook at home. But it's opening up an avenue of entrepreneurship and community, and for which they sell, they're making it to the farmers markets now. They're going beyond just door to door. They're doing online sales, so it is opening up a new avenue in food and in the economy. And as we move forward, especially dealing with the pandemic, we're starting to see a lot more of that happening. And it's allowing, for social media, it does allow for stories to come out and to have more of a digitalized oral history, because now we're doing a lot of videos, a lot of like 30 seconds or 30-second TikToks on how to make things. And so I in 30 years, I really want to see what that turns into as a library. So Toni gets started now. Start getting digitalized in that right now, because I think that's going to be valuable in the future, as we're grasping that. My grandma does not want to be on camera, and I'm just like, let's get this, 30 seconds. And so these are the opportunities that when we start thinking about the future, where do we reside in it, and how do we make sure that we're in the forefront so we are not the next generation that is forgotten?
Thank you so much, Adrian. Thank you, Erika. Thank you, Toni, for this really enlightening conversation today. And I invite you to join us in the after party, where we can continue it with some of the other people who are watching, and the rest of you who are viewing this on the archives. Feel free to share it with other people. And I'll mention to everybody that next week we're postponing the spinning of the wheel. We have one final prize that we're going to give. We've been offering these beautiful bread knives to folks every month. And so we're postponing the spin till next week. So come back next Monday for the spin. And this Wednesday, for those of you who are interested in learning how to make the Altamora bread of Puglia, it was going to be an actual demo from Fred Dancer, who's going to show us a video and show us how to make that bread on our Demo Wednesday presentation. So we'll see you then. And the three of you, please, what we'll need to do is log out of this webinar, and then we'll log back in on the other link that we received this morning to get into the what we call the VIP lounge, which is really our after party lounge, where a few of us will gather and we'll keep going. And stay as long as you can. Thanks so much. I'm going to log off myself, and I'll see you over there in just a couple minutes.
Thanks,
Bye,
everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you to our team behind the scenes. Our event technical and production partners, Ganoid Communications, including our producer, Gurmit Singh, and his team, Jita Gajaria, Gagandeep Singh, and Jaydev Kashari. Thanks also to Ted Nelson and Lael Fretzel of our creative and marketing team at Gumbo Marketing, and the many folks at Johnson & Wales University who supported me throughout this event. My executive assistant, Sarah Standifer, Communications Director, Melinda Law, Chancellor, Mim Rooney, Charlotte Campus President, Cheryl Richards, and our executive team leaders, deans and faculty, Maureen Dumas, Michael Schrader, Michelle Nicholas, Mark Norman, Brent Steyerwalt, Laurie Heimbach, Jerry Lanuza, Amy Felder, Harry Paymiller, Richard Miskovich, and many, many others. Thank you all.